Hi, I'm Nick Holmes and welcome back to my videos on the fall of the Roman Empire. And in this one we're going to look at the Emperor Diocletian. Now, Diocletian was a soldier, but his genius lay in his ability to administrate and to innovate. He was a great administrator, but he wasn't a box ticker, far from it. What he did was to pioneer new forms of political government called the Tetrarchy, which I'll get onto in a moment, a totally new tax system, and to reorganise the army. Now, to start with the army, what he did was to change it from being a highly centralised force, which it had become during the crisis of the 3rd century, when several field armies had been created as the best way of intercepting barbarian invaders. Previously, under Augustus and in the classical age of Rome, the legions had existed along the frontiers, defending the frontiers against the barbarians. This changed in the crisis of the 3rd century, and field armies were used very effectively to intercept barbarian invaders, but they were also destabilizing forces in Roman politics because they enabled emperors to fight each other in civil wars, and they gave complete control of Roman state and society to an army. Now, what Diocletian did was to reverse this process of centralization that had occurred in the 3rd century, and he redistributed the army along the frontiers. And not only did he position the troops along the frontiers so that he could command them more easily, they weren't such large groups as they had been with the field armies. He did retain a couple of field armies, but most of the army was redistributed along the frontiers. He also built fortifications across the empire, and it wasn't so much walls like Hadrian's Wall, of course, had been built a long time before Diocletian. What he did instead was to fortify the main towns and cities along the frontiers. Now, the second thing that Diocletian did was to organise a proper tax system. He inherited an empire that was bankrupt, and this was best illustrated in the debasement of the coinage, which had been going on for decades. By debasement, I mean simply putting less gold, less silver into gold and silver coins. This caused inflation, which was a significant problem in the 3rd century. Now, how Diocletian combated inflation was to restore the gold standard. So he stopped the debasement of the currency. But how do you do that when you don't have enough gold? And to solve that problem, which was the fundamental problem, he introduced a new form of taxation. And this was an extraordinary achievement. I mean, nothing like it had ever been done in history before. He conducted a survey of the entire empire. Previously, the empire had relied on local taxes. For example, in Egypt, the Pharaoh's taxes hadn't been changed, they were just adopted by the Romans. Italy had privileged status within the tax system. What Diocletian did was to abolish all of that. Italy was taxed like any other part of the empire, and he introduced a poll tax and a wealth tax, which were universal, and they were also meant to be fair. And to make them fair, he conducted a census of the entire population and its wealth, and according to the results of that census, you would pay whatever tax was deemed appropriate. Now, this was revolutionary. He was centuries or millennia ahead of his time. It's not until relatively recently that we've had similar tax systems introduced in the world. So it was a radical step forward. Politically, Diocletian was also a revolutionary. He introduced something called the Tetrarchy. Tetra meaning 4, so it was the rule of 4 emperors. And how this operated was he divided the empire into 4 regions and appointed 2 senior emperors and 2 junior emperors, one of each in the east, one of each in the west. In truth, this system only worked because all of the 3 emperors beneath him respected him and obeyed him. He was enormously charismatic and loved by everybody. So the system during his own lifetime worked very well. As we'll get on to in the next video, it certainly didn't work so well after his death. Indeed, after his retirement, because that leads me on to one of the most extraordinary features of his reign was that he is the only emperor to have retired. In AD 305, he retired to a grand palace in Split in Croatia, which can still be seen today, and he lived there gardening. His passion, in fact, was gardening, and he loved to grow prize-winning cabbages. So, in my opinion, Diocletian was arguably Rome's greatest emperor. He restored law and order, he restored the financial stability of the empire, he restored the army to its proper position, defending the frontiers. But I hear you say, didn't he persecute the Christians? And yes, he did, although whether he truly wanted to persecute them is something we're going to discuss in the next video. But it is true that there was a persecution of Christians during his reign, and it was his successor, Constantine, who reversed this policy and would take the huge step of adopting Christianity. Now we'll cover this in the next video. Thanks so much for watching, and if you liked it, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel, and look forward to seeing you next time.